Hello and welcome to our webinar on placement and services for children in special education. This is part of a Writing Great IEPs training series put on by the ESU 13 Special Education Planning Team. Presenting today are myself, Jessica Broderick, and Stephanie Ryan.
Hello.
Our materials today came partly from a project the Nebraska Department of Education is working on to develop better IEPs across the state. And then the Department of Special Education IEP Facilitation Cadre Group. And then our ESU 13 Special Education Planning Team, staff's knowledge and expertise. So all of those groups came together to provide the content that you are watching today. I am Jessica Broderick. I'm the Assistant Director of Special Education at ESU 13 Scottsbluff.
And I am Stephanie Ryan. I'm the Administrative Assistant for the Special Education Department here in Scottsbluff also.
So here's our objectives for today. After viewing our webinar, we want you guys to be able to identify a continuum of placement options for students receiving special education services. To be able to differentiate between different types of services for students that are available via their IEP, and then identify what services are MIPS eligible and some examples of how you might write those into your IEPs so that they can be sure to be covered by MIPS and by the state. So the first thing I wanted to bring up is to remember that placement and services are one of that team's last decisions. So this is one of the things that you'd be talking about at the end of the IEP meeting after you talked about the present level, after you talked about concerns, the services needed, the areas of strength and weakness. And so these are one of the last things we talked about, kind of based on all of this stuff that we've talked about previously. Where do we feel is the best placement for the child and what services would best support their needs? So we wouldn't say, just because a student has autism or just because a student has Down syndrome, they're at this placement and they get this services, to always keep that individualized. So as far as placement goes, this is where the student will physically receive their education. Our legal obligation given to us by IDEA is to place students in what is called the least restrictive environment. So you might sometimes hear that referred to also as LRE. And so there is a really nice guidance document from the Nebraska Department of Education that we'll look at a little bit later that tells us this. The law has displayed a strong preference for children with disabilities to be educated alongside their peers without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. And so that's what we want to keep in mind when we're deciding what placement might be best for a student. And then one of the things also required via federal law is that schools have to ensure that a continuum of alternative placements are available. So if that student maybe is just has not been successful in general education, there's a next step. And if that student isn't successful in that next step, there's a step after that. And so we'll look at some visuals to make those decisions in a little bit. The people that decide the placement have to include the child's parents or a legal guardian, personnel who know the placement options available. So that might be your special education teacher, it might be your district administrator, maybe your school psychologist. And then people who understand the data that was used to develop the IEP. So that again might include your special education teacher, maybe your related service providers like an occupational therapist or something. So a lot of the times this is the people that make up the IEP team, but not always. So if there was an additional expert or person who was brought in to have those discussions, that person might be included in the decision as well. How does the group determine that placement? So placement is determined each and every year as part of that annual IEP process. So we wouldn't say, well, the student was in this separate classroom this past IEP year, so we know they'll be in this separate classroom again. We want to relook at that and reconsider that each and every year. It has to be based on the IEP and the goals and the services that the student needs to be successful. It should be as close as possible to the child's home, and hopefully would place the child in the school she or he would normally attend. So say the neighborhood school as opposed to the school across town, unless that IEP requires some other arrangement. So those are in an ideal world, that's what would happen, but sometimes because of the needs of the student or the services they require, that IEP might require some other arrangement. So this is something pulled directly from that Nebraska Department of Education guidance document that I referenced earlier. They have a really nice visual available that walks through the different options for placement. So you can see that there are some differences depending on the age of the child. So on the left-hand side, there's considerations for birth to age 3, starting with least restrictive environments at the top and then moving towards more restrictive environments at the bottom. And then there in the middle, the light blue is for 3 years old to school-age children. And then the dark blue on the right-hand side is for that kindergarten to age 21 population. So you can see that the least restrictive environment is something that is with typically developing peers like general education classroom. And then we move on to something that's maybe more of a special class, so getting their math class in the resource room or something. And then there's special schools, so maybe a disability-specific school, maybe an alternative placement school that has more supports or is designed more to meet the needs or different needs of the student. Home instruction follows after that, and then institutional setting would be the most restrictive environment for school-age kids. There is also a nice checklist on that document, so I wanted to point that out. This is what that looks like. This is linked in the presentation and will be linked in the comments below this video as well. So if you go to page 9, you scroll there. Here's that visual I referenced if you wanted to take another look at that. And then here's this checklist on page 9. So these are some guiding questions or leading questions the team could discuss when trying to discover what that least restrictive environment is for that child. So there is a nice checklist there for the team, and then just a little blurb on what least restrictive environment is and what it is not. So if you have specific questions, I would encourage you to access that document. That's something that we refer schools to fairly often. It's really well done. So thinking about LRE, that least restrictive environment, is not always just the placement. It also can include the services a student receives. So services are part of that least restrictive environment. So what we want to include in the IEP in regards to services is kind of a narrative description of what that student's plan looks like as far as services. So you should include in this section a statement that we will be using evidence-based practices to support this child, what the service is and how often they receive it, and then the location of the service. So do they get that at their public school, at a separate facility, at the home, whatever that is. There's an example on the right-hand side, which I won't read to you, but just to point out there, it starts with based on peer-reviewed research to the extent practicable. So that statement that we will be using evidence-based practices to support this student, and then what supports he will receive. So gets support in reading with small group reading instruction, and then a frequency, and then additional services he receives like occupational therapy. And then who is providing services? So they're provided by the school district at his normal attendance site. And then you might also include, depending on the age of the student, a statement about what kind of grading scale the child will be given grades on, and if they can participate in extracurricular activities or if they need supports to do that. So where you will find this, excuse me, in the SRS system is on page 6. And so the box looks like this. It just says, it's at the very top and asks you to provide a statement of those services and a description of each. So that's where you would include that information in. The start date for services, this is something that has come up recently, should be the actual date you intend to start services, not just the day of the meeting. And so I have a few examples here to walk you through. So say that you're having your IEP meeting on November 14th, and let's just say that that's a Monday. So you have your IEP on Monday evening after school, and you were planning to start that service right away the next day. So your date, start date for that service would be 11/15. Say that you have that meeting again on Monday evening, but maybe that the team has decided that the math class doesn't need to be in the resource room. We think he could be in the regular education math class with the support of a para. But you need to make some adjustments to the para schedule to make that work and set up some of those supports. So maybe that isn't going to start until Thursday. And so your start date for that would be 11/17. Another example is just maybe your related service provider, like your speech pathologist. It's just at the school on Mondays. So you have that meeting Monday after school. And then the first day the speech pathologist will see that kid is the next Monday. So then your start date for service would be the 21st. So those will have varying start dates probably in IEP, and that's okay. That service time should reflect the exact time you anticipate seeing the student. So we used to be able to say, or often say, you know, if 7 times a quarter is a minimum, but I can always see him more. And what we've been hearing is that we shouldn't be saying that, because if we are seeing a child a lot more than what's listed as the service time in their IEP, it can affect the placement. So maybe what's in the IEP is 7 times a quarter, but I've seen, and so, you know, parent has agreed that, hey, 7 times a quarter for 30 minutes, they're going to get 210 minutes out of the classroom. And then suddenly you're seeing the child like 10 times for 30 minutes. And so now they're 300 minutes outside of the classroom. So that just changes how much they participate in other classrooms or regular education. And so we want to get as close as we can with listing those service times in the IEP. Here's an example from SRS of where you would put that information and what that looks like. So every IEP has the primary service at the top, which usually is determined by what their verification is or what service they're going to get more often. So there's a drop down there where you can choose that service, choose the location, and then your start date and end date go in the next line. And then the line after that is how many minutes a day, minutes a week, minutes per quarter, and then how many days a week, days a quarter, days a month, whatever your frequency is. You can then add additional special education services to get more rows, to list more services as needed with the that same option that I mentioned above. Also on that services page, there's a spot where you're going to list supplementary aids and services. So these are things that are provided in regular education classrooms or other settings that help students to participate. So these are things that will directly be provided to the student or directly provide support to the student. We'll talk next about services that might support staff. So that these supplementary aids and services are something directly provided to the student. So something that might be included here is something like the use of a paraprofessional. If the special education and general education teacher are doing some co-teaching, if they need special materials or aids, or maybe some consultation with the student. So maybe I don't feel like I need to see that student directly all the time, but I want to have the opportunity to check in with them once a week and see how things are going. Here's what that box looks like on SRS. It gives you a place to give a narrative description of that service, the duration dates, and then the location, just like the other services. Supports for school personnel are where you're going to put any services that maybe the staff at the school needs. So that might be if the student has just received an alternative communication device and there needs to be some training with the general education teacher, the special education teacher done by the SLP. Maybe that's additional meetings. So if this is a student that has some behavioral concerns and the team has decided they want to meet every other week to support that student in the area of behavior, maybe consulting with service providers. So the child has some sensory needs and the teacher, classroom teacher wants to have some time to work with the occupational therapist. And so these are things that are provided to the adults as part of the student's plan, as opposed to the supplementary aids and services which are provided directly to the student. That box looks just like the last one. There's a place for a narrative description of whatever that support is, a spot for the dates, and then a spot for the location. Transportation is also in our consideration of services. So there are 3 times that we should always be offering or providing transportation as part of the IEP and the services plan. So the first one is if the child is required to attend a facility other than what would be their normal attendance facility. So say that there's school A on the east side of town and school B on the west side of town, and school B has the program that the student needs, but they maybe live a block from student A or from school A. And so normally they would go to school A, but we're saying because of their specific needs, they need to go to school B. So that would be a time that you need to provide transportation. Also, maybe if they were at an alternative facility, a special day school or something, the district would be required to provide transportation. If the nature of the child's disability is such that special education transportation is required, so say they are a wheelchair user and they need some sort of transportation to get to school that has a wheelchair lift. And so in that case, it would be the school's responsibility. And then if the child is below age 5, so if they're a preschool student and we are asking them to come to the preschool, to the daycare, whatever, to receive those services, that's also a time we would provide transportation. So transportation can look a lot of different ways. It might look like specifically writing, ABC school district goes to the student's house and picks the student up. It might be, if the district is smaller and doesn't have a route like that, reimbursing the parents a mileage cost for transporting their student. It might look like if your school is here and the district is here and then there's a neighboring district that already comes to that school, the district in the middle, the responsible district could pay the other district. And so that can look a lot of different ways, but at the end of the day, what's important is that the district is providing the funding in support of that transportation. And so you can include a description of what that transportation looks like and the need for it in that narrative box there. If you click yes in this transportation box, the second middle box that says if the child qualifies Y provides you a drop down with the options I just spoke about on the previous slide. Also in this section, accommodations on assessments, and we have a whole additional webinar on accommodations and modifications, so we won't spend a lot of time on this, but just a note to say that all of the IEPs should address accommodations that will be used in the school and then also on state and district-wide testing. So if you are listing an accommodation like time and a half on the NSCAS assessment or MAPS testing or something, that should also be listed as an accommodation in testing in their general or special education environment. So the child should be using those accommodations in all situations, not just listing for state testing. And those should be listed on the accommodations page. But like I said, there's a whole separate webinar on that. So if you have further questions, I'd encourage you to check that out. There is a cool feature in SRS that gives you an accommodations list. So if there's a box you can check mark that says show accommodations checklist, and it will generate this letter that maybe could be provided to general education teachers, just saying that the child is eligible for special education, here's the accommodations they need, and then it goes through just a bunch of different common accommodations that you could choose or select and then provide this notification to the teachers. Alternate assessment. So one of the things that the IEP team has to determine is if the student can participate in the state's regular assessment or if they will take the alternate assessment. So the language arts, math, and science, NSCAS also have an alternate version for students with more significant disabilities. And just as a note, there's a separate webinar both on goals and objectives and on alternate assessment. But if a student is marked as going to take the alternate assessment, they have to have objectives or benchmarks included in their annual goals. That's the only time that objectives are required on top of the annual goal. NDE, again, has a nice technical assistance document on this, and I wanted to show this kind of check mark or again some leading questions for a team to discuss as they're considering if a student should participate in alternate assessment. So there's criteria listed on the left and then a further description of that. And then a place to mark if the team thinks, yes, that sounds like this student, or no, that does not sound like this student. So there are 4 questions there, and then a place for the team to all sign and document that they had this conversation and that they all agreed to that. That was just new in SRS this past fall of 2020. The SRS folks did put this on directly into an IEP, and so these alternate assessment criteria are questions taken directly from that document I just showed you. So when you're considering assessment, there's a box in yellow at the top that says they don't have to take assessment this year, which might be, if they've aged out, maybe they're in a 18 to 21 program, maybe they're too young, maybe they're just in one of those years that the kid doesn't have to take assessment. So you can mark that. And then if this is a student who will take the regular assessments, you would mark these questions as appropriate and discussed by the team. If they are a student that would take alternate assessment, these are likely yeses. Extended school year is one of the final considerations, the services for the team. So the purpose of that ESY service is to prevent or slow skill regression. So when you're determining this, you should be pulling information from a lot of different sources, previous data and information. So did they have a lot of regression over Christmas break or something like that? And then if the student has been receiving services for a while, what happened over the last summers? Did they have a lot of trouble coming back in the fall? So this is, again, one of those things that must be considered each and every year. And the program should be individualized to whatever the student has in particular needs. These are some leading questions. I won't read all of these to you to consider for the team when we're talking about if a student needs ESY services, listing the critical skills, what are the barriers, any unique circumstances, what's the data say, and I underline that because that's important. Would not providing services mean that the student might need to be in a more restrictive environment? Any special circumstances? Is it a part of the disability that they would regress or really struggle to retain the skill? So that, again, there's a guidance document from the state on that has some nice questions and another checklist for you. This is what the box on SRS looks like. So you have the option to say we considered it, but we deemed it not necessary. I would also include in that box some discussion on why the team felt it was not necessary, and give some narrative information on what that discussion looked like and how the decision came about. So that is a really quick down and dirty discussion about the services page. It's mostly page 6 in your SRS. The next section we're going to talk about is MIPS, which is Medicaid in Public Schools. Stephanie is actually going to talk about most of that. I just wanted to show you first the form that SRS generates to have parents sign that they either give consent or refuse consent for their student to be enrolled in the MIPS program. And I think this is a form that is hard for teachers to explain to parents as far as what they are giving consent to and what they are or what they are not. And so I'm hopeful after Stephanie's chat about what the process looks like that maybe you'll have a better understanding of that and be able to better explain this form to students. But essentially what happens is that the parent is, and this is how I explain to parents in my IEP meetings, that they are giving consent for the school district to say, yes, Jessica is a real student, she's receiving special education services. Or they're saying, no, I do not want the district to disclose that I am a student receiving special education services. And so it's really just, does the child's name go on this list that is provided to Medicaid? So, Stephanie, take it away.
All right. So these are services that school districts can claim for Medicaid in public schools, which is OT services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language therapy, nursing, mental health, personal care, vision, and transportation. When I first started, or when MIPS first started OT, PT, and speech were the original MIPS services. Since then, they have added nursing, mental health, personal care. Vision is included, but there's a couple fine lines there that the only way we can claim it is through these. And then transportation is another one that we can claim for MIPS, or districts can claim, sorry. Nursing and MIPS, it has to be a licensed RN, a licensed LPN, a health technician, and the health professionals also have to have certain special, what do you call it, services to be able to claim nursing for MIPS. And here's just a couple of examples on how to write into your IEPs as to why they're getting these services, so that you're able to claim it and it's all in there properly. Mental health and MIPS, a physician, a licensed psychologist, licensed independent mental health practitioner. You can go down the list here. These are all the people that can be claimed under the mental health in Medicaid and public schools. Personal care assistants can be claimed during MIPS also. A personal care assistant providers must be 19 or older, and they must be employed or under contract with the school district, ESU, or approved cooperatives providing special education and related services. And here's a couple examples of the supports that you can write into the IEP as to why the student needs their services to help claim MIPS also. Jessica has attached a couple of the guidance documents here that you can go on, and it basically explains everything that we're talking about, who can provide the services, what services you can claim, some examples of what you need to claim them, and there's also a website on here for any.gov that has a lot of good information to help you. Jessica says she uses it a lot to write in her IEPs and just kind of reference back to make sure you have everything covered as to why the child needs these services so that you can claim MIPS.
Yeah, this is the, what I have up now is the guidance document from the Nebraska Department of Education, but like Stephanie said, DHHS also put out a guidance document on this. And so a lot of times, especially for the use of paraprofessionals and how we document that in there, let me just find the page. They're listed as personal assistance services, like Stephanie mentioned, but if those paras are being used because the school has personal care needs and not just educational help needs, I will often just come directly to this document and say, okay, Jessica needs support in basic personal hygiene, including hair grooming, nail care, and dressing. Jessica needs personal care help in the area of toileting, specifically for getting to and from the bathroom, on and off the toilet, and then changing an empty catheter bag or whatever the situation is. So a lot of times I will go to these documents and pull that language directly from them. So we know that it's just what needs to be in there and covers what needs to be covered.
Okay, so the MIPS process, we have to have a consent form from the IEP. We also have to have a list from Nebraska Medicaid to the schools, MIPS representative. So they also need to send us eligibility list every month. So I pull that off the portal and make sure that the kids on there are eligible. There is an exit list that comes with that eligibility list. So sometimes kids are on there 1 month and they could be off the other month. So we have to keep track of who's eligible for that month and who's not. And then I send that to the service providers to let them know for billing each month which child is eligible and which child is not, so that they can make sure that they know that we can claim them for the month. And then the providers receive time studies from Fairbanks every month. They give us a couple days to receive those time studies, and they update their information, and we send that back to Fairbanks, and that's how the districts get paid.
Thanks, Stephanie, because when we were developing this, I told Stephanie, was like, okay, I know I have parents sign the form, and then I know I get the time studies, but I had no idea what happened in between as far as her pulling the list, and I didn't know that those new IEPs and MDTs get signed by a local physician and all of that stuff. So I learned a lot in putting this together, so thank you.
All right, well, we want to say thank you. To receive professional development credit through ESU 13, Jessica put a link in a form in here for you to fill out to let us know what you received out of this and what sessions you took. And she also is going to attach a form. What did you say, Jessica? I'm sorry, for comments or?
Yeah, so in the YouTube video, below the video, we will list the resources that we've discussed, so links to those guidance documents, and then there will also be a link to this form. And in that form, it just lets us know that you watched it and that we can give you professional development credit. But then there's also a spot for if you have additional questions or wanted some additional support or needed to know more about this, there's a place to list that, and then one of our members of our special education planning team can reach out to you and help you out with whatever further questions you have. So that's all we have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you.